Welcome to the Early Edge NFL Player Prop Show, brought to you by BetMGM, the sportsbook born in Vegas. I am your host, EC, otherwise known as Eric Cohen. Glad to be with you here on a Friday or whenever you are listening throughout the weekend. All right, let's get right to it. Let's see the recap. I mean, it was as ugly as it gets. We stunk last week collectively. There's no other way to put a bow on this one. Just not our best week. It's our worst week of the year. We'll own it, and we'll talk about it, and that's what it is. So let's bring in the stars of the show, and let's try to turn it around with a 12-0 Week 15. So we have the smartest fantasy football mind on the planet from CBS Sports, Uncle Dave Richard, and we have one of the great prop bettors on the planet. Listen, nobody's 100%, but this guy makes money hand over fist. I've seen the Bills. I know what it's all about. The one, the only Propstarz. Hey, Proppy, going to come to you first. I know you want to talk about what happened last week.
Yeah, tough week, EC. I mean, there's no other way to put it than that was just absolutely terrible, awful results. 0-5. I don't hide from my losses. I certainly will never make excuses either. And if you've been betting as long as I have, this won't be the last time that I go 0-5 here. But what's important to note here is I'm not going to overreact to these results. You won't see me going 2 or 3 units on multiple plays this week to try and make up for my previous losses. I'm going to take things one pick at a time. I'm going to trust the process here, and I'm going to do everything I can to get back on track. I'm also not going to underreact or overreact here. So I think this is an important time, almost a learning experience or a learning opportunity or opportunity, as Uncle Dave would say here. These losses are going to happen. It's good to remain, trust your process, remain on course here. And I'm looking forward to getting things turned around.
Uncle Dave, let's play therapy session number 2 while we're starting the prop show. Last night, between the 49ers and Rams, a total of 48. Everybody's thinking high-scoring game. I'm betting overs for player props and fantasy football, the start of the playoffs, and it's the only touchdownless game in the NFL this season. Can you give kind of guidance or advice to not only prop bettors, but fantasy football players who had to suffer through that last night?
Nope, can't do it. This is what happens sometimes when you decide to bet or when you decide to start somebody in fantasy football. It's the same thing. You've got confidence in somebody. You're saying to yourself, and just picture yourself saying this before the game. Cooper Kupp is a good NFL wide receiver. He gets a lot of targets, should be a high-scoring game. He's got a great quarterback. Yeah, let it rip. He's going to start on my fantasy team. Makes sense, right?
Yeah.
I don't know what his prop numbers were last week, or last night, I should say, but I guarantee you not even the books knew that he was going to go catchless. Expletive happens. And I'm sorry to be loud about that or brash about that. But the fact of the matter is that we are attempting to predict human behavior in a game that is essentially controlled chaos. Think about that. And if you think long and hard about it, you might say to yourself, you know what? I don't know if I want to bet on this anymore. And that's an okay conclusion to come to. People have come to me, forget about betting, they play fantasy and they keep losing year after year after year. Why do I keep losing? No, see, EC's got to put your hand down because I know you pay attention in your fantasy leagues. You're making trades, you're making ad drops, you pay attention to the draft, but bad luck happens, dumb luck happens. You ever get into a car accident, like a little fender bender? Yeah, that's bad luck. You ever get you order food at a restaurant and it comes out 30 minutes later when you were expecting it in 10 minutes? Bad stuff happens. And so I think Proppy's on the right track. And I remember when I went through my cold streak, and I'm still on a cold streak. This whole show's been a little rough for the last couple of weeks. But you know what? You guys were here when we were winning big earlier on in the season, right? You knew something like this might happen. And if you run away now, you're not going to be here when we turn it around. And I'll say this last thing. I said last week I thought the lines were really sharp. I had a hard time coming up with picks that I liked last week. And I was close on a couple of them. I was way off on one. Chuba Hubbard, nice job. I kind of like some lines this week. I don't think they're quite as sharp as they were last week. And it makes me wonder either, am I going to get bamboozled? We're going to lose again? Or are we going to get on top of this thing, find some picks that we like? And remember, be selective, be tentative. You don't want to go and bet on everything and have fun with it. And if you're not having fun, don't do it. And this is going to be the only prop show, the only gambling show that you will ever hear where they suggest to you, don't bet. It's okay not to. You have our permission, but more importantly, you'll still have your bankroll. You'll be happy for it.
Remember those 2 words that you just said, Dave. Have fun. That's what I want everybody out there to remember. Go ahead, Prop.
Yeah, sometimes I think Dave made a good point. Sometimes the best bet is no bet. And if you're not feeling things, I think it's good not to force the action, especially if you had maybe a tough week like I had this past week going 0-5. There's nothing wrong with, skipping a week or skipping a game, skipping Monday Night Football or Thursday Night Football, taking the game off, recharging the batteries, taking some time to self-evaluate a little bit. So, yeah, I think that's great advice from Uncle Dave, and I think that would benefit anyone at any stage of your betting career.
And why would somebody stop betting but still watch our show? Well, we're kind of fun. We get along and we like doing what we do. But also, you'll stay in touch, and when you start to see us seem to be in tune and in sync with what's going on, maybe that'll help bring you the confidence you need to place a bet, even if it's just a sprinkle.
Unknown entity in the chat says bounce back time with, I think, 6 exclamation points. And he says Propstarz is a beast. So let's get right to it. The beast receiving props. Your 1.5 unit play this week, Proppy, is in the game of the week, Detroit and Buffalo. Who is it and why?
All right, let's get right to it, guys. This is my favorite prop of the week, the only multi-unit play that I have this week. It's Amon-Ra St. Brown. I'm going over. The number I got on the site is 67.5. I have a significant edge on this play, which is why I'm making this a 1.5 unit play for me. So I'd play this all the way up to 74.5. I typically don't have an edge that size as far as my projections are concerned, but this one just checks all the boxes for me. Let's start from the beginning. Optimal game environment here. This may be the biggest total we've seen all year, if I'm not mistaken, 54.5 points. Certainly the biggest total this week that I can remember, at least over the last few weeks. We're also getting a discount on this line at 67.5 for Amon St. Brown. He's typically somewhere in the mid-70s, but he's had 3 fairly quiet weeks by his standards. So therefore, we're getting this in the high 60s here. Jared Goff this season having an MVP caliber year, if not for the unbelievable year that Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson are both having. He could be potentially the front runner in some other years. He has been phenomenal with a clean pocket. He's the QB1, actually, with a clean pocket. That's relevant because the Buffalo Bills have not done a good job generating quick pressure, and their pass rush is fairly weak. Also, their coverage unit isn't that good either. 14th in EPA allowed per dropback, 25th in PFF's coverage grade. I also think this game has a tremendous chance of providing both offenses with increased passing volume. Dave and I talk about this all the time. This is a volume game. We're looking for additional volume, additional opportunities here. That's what leads to potential spike weeks here. So I think we could see additional dropbacks and passing attempts for Jared Goff for a variety of reasons as I've laid out, in addition to Buffalo potentially pushing Detroit. And it's obviously the odds makers are projecting a high scoring environment here. Then if we look under the hood at Amon-Ra St. Brown's metrics, I love what we're looking at. 27% target share. That's in the 95th percentile at wide receiver. 20% first read targets per route run. That's in the 92nd percentile. 2.18 yards per route run. That's a phenomenal number. Anything over 2 yards per route run is elite stuff. So this looks like a potential spike week for Amon-Ra St. Brown. Can't ask for a better matchup. Should be a track meet. Should be a ton of points, and he should get a ton of volume. So love this spot for him. We get the discount. This is a spot I will be laddering. I will 100% be betting Amon-Ra St. Brown to go over 80, 90, and 100 receiving yards. I love his chances of having a big game, multi-unit play for me. And again, I'd play this one up to 74.5 yards.
Just say nuclear. That's all we want to hear. Just say nuclear.
Nuclear. This is a
there you go. That's all we wanted to hear
for Amon-Ra St. Brown.
There we go. That's what we needed to hear. Now, Dave, before I ask you to weigh in, I'm going to give a pick here, and you're going to tell us which of these 2 picks you like the best.
Okay.
So my 1.5 unit play this week, my favorite play, is Adam Thielen over 50.5 receiving yards at -115. I'm playing this for 1.5 units. In the 3 games since returning from injured reserve, he has 57, 99, and 102 yards. Over the last 2 weeks, he's playing 74% of snaps, has a 28% target share, which leads the NFL, and he has 17 catches on 21 targets. The volume is there. Oh, by the way, over their last 7 games, Dallas has given up more than this number to 9 wide receivers, and SportsLine's models and Uncle Dave's fantasy rankings also like this one. Pretty good. You have him as a top 25 PPR option, and SportsLine's models have some value there, I think, at 58 and 67 total yards. So, Dave, of those 2 plays, my 1.5 unit play and Proppies, do you like St. Brown or Thielen's over better?
At the risk of going against what I said at the beginning of this show, I would consider parlaying each of your bets. I like them both that much. Thielen just makes all the sense in the world. And this one of my favorite stats from my research this week, and this is from watching Thielen actually play. 11 targets last week, 6 of them were on throws of 12-plus air yards. So these are not dink and dunk throws. These are plays where he can legitimately get some chunk yardage. He did against Proppy's favorite player in the whole world, Cooper DeJean. If you watch the play, or DeJean rather, sorry. If you watch that play, he put DeJean in the blender and just had a monster catch for like 24 yards. He can do that against Dallas, and Dallas' secondary is a little bit beat up. I don't know if Trevon Diggs is going to play, Jordan Lewis is going to play. So there are going to be some real chances for Adam Thielen to do well. As for St. Brown, he plays in the slot quite a bit for Detroit. Do you know that in the last 5 weeks, the Bills have allowed 13.3 yards per catch to slot receivers? Do you know that they've allowed an 84% catch rate to slot receivers? On those averages, I think it means that Amon-Ra is going to need 7 targets. And if he gets that, that's 5 catches, maybe 6. He should easily get over 68 yards doing that. I love both of your plays. This is the start that I wanted. This is perfect. You guys have conviction. The numbers seem reasonable. I don't think we're getting trapped with either one. I especially don't think we're getting trapped with the St. Brown line. This is great. I like both of these.
And Uncle Dave, you said my favorite word in the English language, and that is parlay, which is probably Proppy's least favorite word in the English language, but it's my favorite, so I appreciate that. All right, Proppy, you got another one going back to that Lions-Bills game. If you think it's going to be a track meet, you think St. Brown's going to do well on one side. So another one of your favorite players who you tried to sell me in fantasy football earlier in the year, but he looks like he's pretty much worth the play, especially what we saw last week. Let's see what he's got this week. But who is it?
Yeah, it's Khalil Shakir. And just for the listeners at home, you made a disparaging remark about Khalil Shakir, and I felt obligated to defend him and his honor and his status as a very good wide receiver in the NFL, one of the best slot receivers in the NFL. And before I break down the prop, I want to mention, I talk about this at length, but it's important to bring up, in my opinion here, when we're looking, we can gather some information here from the odds makers that will really benefit us when it comes to props. And that's when we have a game with a high total, which we do, 54.5 points. Again, one of the highest totals we've seen this season. The odds makers are expecting a lot of points here. So what we can do is we can look at these games with high totals and try to find what I would refer to in the DFS world as cheap pieces. Those are players who are going to be on the field a lot, who earn targets and are productive, and that have discounted numbers potentially. Let's weigh it against their mean median averages or look at their previous numbers in previous weeks here. So this fits the mold precisely for Amon-Ra St. Brown and also for Khalil Shakir. I love him to go over 53.5 receiving yards. This one I know has ticked up maybe a yard or two since I put this out a couple hours ago. I'd play this one up to 57.5 yards. Khalil Shakir just runs his routes exclusively out of the slot. I'm expecting 75 to 90% route participation. You're talking about a Josh Allen offense when you're playing exclusively out of the slot with up to 90% route participation. That is a very, very valuable role to have. On top of that, Khalil Shakir is highly, highly efficient. He earns targets at a high rate, and then he makes the most of those targets as well. If we look at, again, some of the advanced metrics here, 76% slot rate. That's a very high number. 2.39 yards per route run. I mentioned earlier, anything over 2 is considered elite. 2.39 is a phenomenal number. 23% target share. He is Josh Allen's favorite target and his most trusted a target. And that's despite acquiring Amari Cooper and having Dalton Kincaid, who may or may not suit up. Dave could probably expand on that this week. Khalil Shakir is Josh Allen's guy. He loves him here. And again, we're looking at a 54.5 point total. We're looking at increased passing volume. That, again, is the recipe for a potential spike week here. So give me all the Khalil Shakir. If I'm playing DFS, I'm also buying him up as well, along with Amon-Ra. Love his chances. It's probably my second favorite prop on the board, Khalil Shakir to go over 53.5 receiving yards. I'd play this up to 57.5 comfortably.
Dave, are you concerned the fact that Dalton Kincaid and Keon Coleman are set to return for Buffalo this week?
I am. I think that they could put a bit of a damper on Shakir and the volume of targets that he gets, but it doesn't mean that I don't like the prop. It's not like the number is supremely high. I think if the number were like St. Brown's number, and that it could be, I don't know if it would actually really be 67.5, but it could have been like around 63, 62 if those guys weren't playing because of what Shakir did last week. I wonder if the books could have steamed that up a little bit, but they didn't. And the matchup is a little bit harder. Detroit's been a little bit better over the last 6 games against slot receivers than Buffalo has. But I do ultimately expect a lot of passing in this game. And we could have said that about Thursday's game as well. I don't know if the rain had anything to do with it, but I do think the defense has had a lot to do with that game being low scoring on Thursday. I don't have the same type of conviction about how good the Lions or the Bills defense, especially in the secondary, are right now. And that's going to help everybody that's catching passes get some decent numbers in this game. I don't mind the Shakir over. I think it's a competitive bet.
Well, Uncle Dave, you don't have any receiving plays, but you have a couple running and a couple passing, and we will find out what unders and maybe a couple overs you'll throw in after we hear from one of our sponsors. All right, Uncle Dave, Monday night. Let's start there with an under. Yeah, that's an Uncle Dave special. It's a proppy special, but also you love to throw in your share of unders. Let's start with a running back on Monday night. I don't want to tease anymore. Tell us who it is and why.
I couldn't believe that the under for DeAndre Swift's rush attempts was 15.5, and that's at -118 from our generous pals at BetMGM. First of all, he's barely practiced all week, but interim offensive coordinator Chris Beatty thinks he'll practice Saturday and then play on Monday. And that's great because he's been under this total in 4 straight games. He's been incredibly inefficient for 6 games. Per NFL analytics genius Warren Sharp, if you take away a 39-yard run by Swift against the Packers, he's averaged 3 yards per carry since week 9. That's terrible. And we already know he isn't a 3-down player for Chicago, and that's even been the case with Roschon Johnson on the shelf. We know he's not at 100%. Hello, look at the injury report. And I don't expect the Bears to be playing with a lead, especially against the Vikings defense. Listen to this. They've let up just 3.7 yards per carry to running backs over its past 4 games, and that includes 3 weeks ago when they took on the Bears in Chicago, 2.1 yards per carry. So I don't know if there's even going to be the chance for DeAndre Swift to get a bunch of carries in this game. I don't mind taking the under on his yardage either, but I think he does have that potential to rip off one run for like 15, 18 yards, and then you kind of get, it's going to be rough potentially on that bet. I don't see him getting 16 carries in this game against Minnesota. In fact, I would venture to say that Chicago would get him involved in the passing game and little short passes to try and keep Caleb Williams calm in the pocket. It's been an issue for him. It was especially an issue last week, but it's really been an issue for him all season long. I'm taking under 15.5 rush attempts for DeAndre Swift at -118 with the hope that he does actually play on Monday.
See, as somebody that doesn't look at attempts, that is a great prop. I look at yards, just the way that I always go about my research, but that's savvy because you also look at the game flow that the Bears should be losing to Minnesota and playing catch up. Go ahead, Proppy.
Yeah, I think that's a tremendous look from Dave. If I were to set that line, I'd set it at 13.5. So,
Agreed.
Tremendous value there from Dave. I expect that to close at least 14.5. So that is one I would run, not walk, to grab.
Yep, and I would
All right,
play
so-
that down to 14.5 as well.
All right, Proppy, let's talk about your under that you're giving out for rushing this week. This is kind of a surprising one because a lot of people, I like to read some of the reports. They're like, over, this guy's going to blow up this week. But Propstarz says not so much. Who am I talking about?
Yeah, this is one of these spots that I really love for a variety of reasons, but also because it kind of bucks conventional wisdom here or narrative. And that's going to be fading Joe Mixon, who's had a fine season, arguably the best season of his career. Look at Uncle Dave's face. That's exactly the response I wanted to elicit. So, we're going to go under 81.5 rushing yards for Joe Mixon here. I'll explain why. So if we look at Houston as a whole, if we look at their team, they've actually gone a lot more pass heavy over the last 3 weeks. What I mean by that, obviously game script plays a factor, right? If Houston's trailing in games, of course they're going to opt to throw the football more. Uncle Dave was so disgusted by that pick he had to sign off.
I had to get something out of my mouth for a second. I didn't want to say it.
But no, what I mean by when I say pass heavy, I mean that they're opting to throw the football on first down. So in neutral game environments or game scripts or on first down, that's really the indicator if a team is pass heavy or run heavy, kind of what they're opting to do on first down. The Texans are opting to throw the football more than they have all season on first down. That's relevant here because they're playing a Miami defense that I think is very underrated if we're talking about their run defense. And they're much more exploitable in the secondary. Despite having Jalen Ramsey and Kendall Fuller and a lot of big names, Javon Holland in that secondary, they've been a very vulnerable secondary. They're quite strong against the run. Miami got off to somewhat of a slow start this year defensively, but they've been exceptional against the run. If you look at their season-long statistics, which don't tell the whole story, more on that in a second, 11th in EPA versus the rush, 8th in success rate, 5th in defensive run grade here. So while Joe Mixon has certainly been good, he's really benefited from elite usage in a very good offense, and he's also a plus in the passing game as well. From just a rushing standpoint, he's been fairly inefficient here. So I think in order to eclipse this, he's going to really need to go and get a lot of volume in this game. So let's look at what the Dolphins' run defense has done. First and foremost, they have not allowed a single running back to eclipse 100 yards or even 90 yards this season. Okay. Last week, what did they do? Last week to the Jets, they held their combined running backs to 83 yards. Previous to that was New England, I believe, 86 yards. Josh Jacobs, previous to that, 19 carries, 43 yards. The Raiders running backs collectively had 40 yards the previous week. Before that, the Rams running backs, Blake Corum and Kyron Williams, under 70 yards. James Cook, previous to that, 44 yards. 53 yards on 20 totes to James Conner against Arizona. Tyler Goodson and the Colts filling in for Jonathan. 14 carries for 51 yards. Week 5 was the last time a running back eclipsed their rushing prop, and that was Ramondre Stevenson, who had 89 rushing yards. This Miami run defense has been a lot better than the stats indicate. And because of that slow start, the season-long statistics don't tell the full story. I would make the argument that the Miami run defense is as good as any run defense in the NFL. And again, I think the combination of Houston opting to throw the football more on first down, attacking a vulnerable pass defense, Miami shaping up to be a pass funnel, and Joe Mixon being somewhat inefficient and getting a sky-high number of 81.5 yards makes this a very good look and a very strong fade. I love the fact that everyone I've told this prop to has had a similar reaction to Dave as well.
So, Dave, in your fantasy rankings, PPR-wise, you have Mixon 5th. So how do you counter?
Before Dave answers that, that the reason Mixon has been such a plus is because he's a plus in the passing game. He's a very good receiving back out of the backfield. Not to steal Dave's thunder or answer the question. If we're talking about strictly rushing, though, again, he's in a very good offense. He has a high touchdown ceiling because of that offense and because of the elite usage. But again, I really think from an efficiency standpoint, he's going to struggle. If he's going to go over this total, he's going to need like 20 to 22 plus carries, in my opinion.
Okay, so obviously when you look at Joe Mixon's game log and you see game after game after game of over 100 yards, it's really hard to buy into what you're saying, Prop. But there are a couple of games where he went up against good, efficient run defenses in Detroit and Tennessee. And I remember the Tennessee game. I think I might have even given the pick of Mixon to go over in that game. And he was stonewalled. Here's something you didn't mention. The offensive line for Houston is not in great shape right now. And even though they're coming off of a bye, there's an injury in play to the interior of that offensive line that could hurt Joe Mixon. But here's something else you didn't mention. A lot of the games where the Dolphins gave up low rushing yardage, they didn't really get run on very much. For example, when they took on the Patriots in Week 12, 59 rush yards to running backs, 15 carries. That's it. The week before that against the Raiders, you talked about it. They only gave up 29 rush yards against the Raiders. It was on 11 carries. They've gone up against teams that have had to give up on the run because the Dolphins are putting up points. And that's something that's been really good and obviously something that Tua Tagovailoa has been generating. The reason why I'm not challenging you to a showdown is because that scenario, that exact scenario where the Dolphins can put up points and force the Texans to throw would take the ball out of Joe Mixon's hands. That's the argument for taking the under on this. It has nothing necessarily to do with how great this Dolphins run defense has been. Look, in their last 6 games, they're giving up 4 yards per carry. They're giving up a 5-yard rush rate of 33.3. Literally a third of the rushes that they've seen over the last 6 weeks have gone at least 5 yards. You're hoping for a game script where Joe Mixon can't get 20 yards. And even if he does, or 20 carries, I should say. And even if he does get 20 carries, no guarantee he's going to get 82 yards. So I see where you're coming from on it. I love the conviction. I think I would probably stay away, me personally, from betting against Joe Mixon because he's been great this year. But I sure as hell wouldn't take the over on this.
The reason that the running back carries are low against Miami, in addition to teams playing from behind, is there a significant pass funnel? Because if we look at the path of least resistance, they're a much more vulnerable pass defense than they are run defense. So teams are they're designing the game plan to attack Miami through the secondary, through the air versus on the ground because they're a much more stout run defense. So I think it's a combination of that, Uncle Dave. I think it's partly because, again, Miami's offense has obviously been productive and Tua is scoring a lot of points. So teams are being forced to abandon the run probably a little bit earlier than they would like to. But I really believe it's also, and I don't, it's not even a belief. I think there's enough data that points to teams are opting to go attack Miami, even in neutral game environments, through the air because of how vulnerable the secondary is.
I think we might have a correlated prop here down the line on this show that you might be interested in, Prop.
Say that again, Uncle Dave?
I think there might be a correlated prop that I'm going to give that you'll like. That has a little bit to do with what we're talking about.
Shout out to my buddy Dan, who lives for correlated parlays, EC. Correlated parlays.
Hey, I have a trivia question for you, Proppy, while we're doing random things here on the show. Do you know which individual player leads the NFL in penalties this year?
Is it an offensive or defensive player?
It is an offensive player, and I say this because it's correlated to your prop. Because every game when I watch
line, isn't it?
Laramie Tunsil, every game.
Either him or one of the Chiefs tackles. It's got to be one of the two.
Laramie Tunsil has 15 penalties this year, 10 false starts. I just wanted to point that one out. All right, Uncle Dave, you have an over. All right, we finally have some overs that we're going to give out here in this section. We've talked about under. A player that has come back from injury recently, and now he's going to get more volume, you would think. Who is it?
Pacheco self before you wreck yourself, EC. It's Isaiah Pacheco over 13.5 rush attempts at -120. And this is one I would put 1.5 units on. Big fan of this one. Not only was Pacheco over this prop line last week, but he was over in each of his first 2 games of this season. And he's literally had 14 plus carries in 12 of his past 14 games, including the playoffs. There is no doubt who the Chiefs want to give the ball to. We saw as much last week, and his snaps last week went from 22 the week before to 31. Another increase in snap share is expected this week for Isaiah Pacheco. On the season, the Cleveland Browns have witnessed 21.1 carries per game against opposing running backs. Okay, that's a nice number. But since they've lost Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah to injury, that number has bloomed up a little bit to 23.2. And in their past 3 games specifically, it's been 26.3 running back rushes per game. 2 of those 3 games were against the Steelers. One of them was in a blizzard. I get that, but I still think the Steelers have shown the rest of the league that, yes, you can run on the Cleveland Browns. And speaking of weather in Cleveland, there's inclement weather in the forecast. It's supposed to be very windy. There could be some rain, and that's something that's going to be bad for passing games. It's one of the reasons why Jameis Winston recently went down in my fantasy rankings at quarterback. I was a big fan of his this week, but with the wind expected to be between 15 and 25 miles an hour, and that stadium is right on the lake, you can forget about Jameis Winston having accuracy on his downfield throws. They're both going to have to run, both these teams. And maybe there's some under for Patrick Mahomes props, including his pass attempts under. I might go ahead and try something like that. But the one that I really like is this one. Isaiah Pacheco over 13.5 rush attempts at -120. I would definitely play this to 14.5. And I might even go 15.5 if it was a plus number on the odds.
Interesting. I appreciate that. Proppy, how low would you go on Joe Mixon? 80.5 is what Gene asked about in the chat.
Yeah, absolutely. So just from like if you're watching this or listening to this podcast or program, again, Dave cannot handle the Joe Mixon talk. He has to bow. The look of disgust is just too much for Dave. He has to exit as soon as you hear Joe Mixon being faded. But yeah, just as a general rule of thumb, if you're listening to this or watching this and the numbers that I or Dave give out, I can only speak for myself, but the numbers that I give out, there's typically a 5% wiggle room, so in either direction, under or over. So feel free to always ask. But yeah, if I'm putting the play out, I have a pretty hefty or significant edge that typically is going to be at least 5% in either direction.
So I'll give out my rushing play before we move on to passing props. I'm going Jalen Warren over 50.5 rushing plus receiving yards at -120. I think Proppy had this one the other week, and he hit. You had his rushing, and it hit because of receiving. So Jalen Warren in 7 straight games has 59 or more combined yards. He has double-digit touches in 6 of those 7 games, and we're looking at a game where the game flow should be in his favor with Philadelphia, Proppy's Eagles up on top. By the way, he's outsnapped Najee Harris in 2 of the last 3 games, including by a 34-27 margin last week. I think this line is too low. Dave, am I crazy? Now, I didn't see – he's not super high in your rankings because he's still a part-time player, but this line looks about 10 yards too low to me as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't play it if it was 10 yards or even 5 yards higher than it is, but this was on my list last week, and I took it off at the last minute. I didn't have the confidence to recommend taking the over on his combo yardage, and look at what he did. He had a great game. You are absolutely right. He is playing a lot more than normal in this offense. And against Philadelphia, there's always the chance that the Steelers are trailing in the second half, and that should mean more chances for Jalen Warren to make plays through the air. I think the number's too low. I think the fair line should probably be in the neighborhood of 54.5, and I would still take the over on that. This is when you ask me later what's my favorite prop on the show, this is going to be the favorite prop on the show, EC.
I'll take it. I appreciate that. Thank you, Dave. All right, Proppy, let's move on to passing props, and we're going to talk about Anthony Richardson.
I almost just bowed out when I heard that. I almost just.
And then he, yeah. I mean, it happens.
Just
Proppy.
pulled an Uncle Dave and bowed out when I heard that was going to be his favorite prop instead of one of my props.
Every now and then, I get one right. Yeah, go ahead. Go with Anthony Richardson. Tell us, do you like him or fade him?
Every now and then, you see a broken clock can be right twice a day. So yeah.
Tell us about Richardson.
This week, guys. We're looking for some good unders here. This is one that I love. It's Anthony Richardson under. Yeah, it's Anthony Richardson under 190.5 passing yards. Big number for Anthony Richardson, despite being sub 200 yards. Anthony Richardson, frankly, just doesn't pass for very many yards. He's been under this in 6 of 9 games this season. He's averaging 168 passing yards per game over his very brief career, 160 yards per game, albeit a very limited sample size. But really, this has to do with facing Denver. Denver first in EPA allowed per dropback. Let's talk about how good Denver's defense is. First in EPA allowed per dropback, second in success rate, second in explosive pass percentage, fifth in PFF's coverage grade, first in pressure rate, third in blitz rate, second in pass rush get off, third in pass rush win rate. Why did I include all those pass rush stats, EC? The reason is because A, Anthony Richardson struggles versus teams with good or above average pass rushes, but really because Anthony Richardson has a very slow release. He really struggles with teams that can get home and generate quick pressure. When teams can get home quickly, it forces Richardson to rely on the shorter, quicker passes, and he is notoriously inaccurate and really struggles close to the line of scrimmage with those touch passes. So this is just as difficult of a matchup as it gets for Anthony Richardson. They're also hiding him a bit. Indianapolis is leaning heavily on their running game, which I anticipate being the case. The most dropbacks that Anthony Richardson has had in a game this season is 39. So he really just is not, there's just not going to be, unlikely to be a lot of passing volume, especially against this Denver team. They are good against the run as well. But yeah, I expect Indianapolis, while the game is competitive, even if they're trailing, I expect them to run the football primarily on offense. And when they go to throw, he's not going to have time in the pocket. And in addition to that, this Denver secondary and their coverage unit is as good as any in the NFL. So very difficult matchup for Anthony Richardson. I think it's a really good spot to fade him. Under 190.5 passing yards. I'd play this one down to 182.5 passing yards.
So if we're looking for a same-game parlay, Uncle Dave, we heard Anthony Richardson on one side. You know, it's sort of my head thing. Some people like it, some don't. I like to make it fun on Sundays. If Proppy's playing Richardson's under, then Bo Nix is one of your plays. What are we doing with Nix on Sunday?
You know, I don't mind if you want to do a high stakes parlay for like $2, $3. I mean, really sticking yourself out there. You could do it. No, not this. This, as in you don't really want to parlay that often. That's how you're not getting great odds on your parlays. Come on. But I do like Bo Nix, and I would take Bo Nix to get over 21.5 completions. And the juice is only minus 106. And I think that there's a opportunity here for Bo Nix to go over, just like he did against Atlanta when I picked this a few weeks ago. Indianapolis has reliably been one of the league's zone heaviest coverage defenses. They've also struggled to get pressure on the quarterback. They're almost the anti-Denver Broncos, which is why this over makes some sense, because now if Bo Nix knows what he's throwing against and they're going to try and take away the deep pass and they're not pressuring him, well, he's going to be able to complete passes all day long. And it's going to be short throws, just like we watched him do for 5+ years in college. Against Atlanta a few weeks back, 28 of 33 passing, easily went over the number on his completions prop. And as a bonus, the Broncos' run game has struggled for the past month, and Nix himself has run much less in his past 4 games. This is essentially a playoff game as well for the Broncos. A win here gives them a tiebreaker over the Colts, and it pads their lead in the AFC for the remaining AFC teams that are actually in the playoff hunt. There aren't that many. I wouldn't expect Sean Payton to leave this game to his suspect rushing attack when Nix has been their offensive identity all season long. So let's go over 21.5 pass completions at minus 106. I would play this one up to 22.5 as well.
So we've got the correlation between Richardson and Nix if you want to do that $2 same game parlay, as Uncle Dave suggested. Or we can talk about rookie of the year bets here. Now, Jaden Daniels is a proppy favorite that he has on a lot of fantasy teams, that at least the leagues that I'm in with you. So I want to get out a Jaden Daniels prop. Coming off a bye, he's now playing in the state where he lit it up in college, and the over passing yards is only 210.5 at New Orleans, who, by the way, has not been great in the secondary. Now, I played this prop with Matthew Stafford the other week in New Orleans. Didn't go so well for me, but quarterbacks in general are 9-4 to the over against the Saints this year. Problem with Daniels, he's only gone over this number in one of his last 5 games. Nonetheless, I think that this line is soft for me, considering that New Orleans secondary is not good, and considering the fact that New Orleans is going to be out of the game early. This is going to be a Jaden get-right game as they pursue the playoffs, so I'm going to play this number at 210.5. Proppy, what do you say?
I do like this prop. You see, this is one that I gave a look to. And an interesting fact about New Orleans is they actually throw the ball significantly more without Derek Carr on the field than they do with him, almost as if they have no idea what to do, and they're just throwing a bunch of stuff at the wall to see what will stick. But they have a much higher pass rate over expected with Carr off the field than on the field. And if that's the case, that bodes well for this Jaden Daniels prop. So I do like it. I do obviously lean over on it. Obviously, I do have doubts if New Orleans can push Washington into a pass-heavy game script or environment, but I do lean over on it, certainly.
Fair enough. Uncle Dave, for your Bo Nix prop, how high would you go on that number?
Oh,
you
22.5, and that's where you're going to find it at a bunch of books. I found one at 21.5. Either number's fine. I think once you get to 23.5, especially if it's like minus 110 or higher, I would not touch.
Well, let's give out one more from you for passing props. Tua. This is a number that is high for me. Do we go over or do we go under?
Tua Tagovailoa's number is 24.5 completions, and I'm taking the over on it against the Houston Texans. And getting over 25 completions is not anything new for Tagovailoa. You see, he's had 28-plus completions in each of his past 4 games, and it will help him that he's facing a Texans pass defense that's typically zone-heavy. At 3 of their last 4 games, they played zone at an 81.8% rate or higher. The one game they didn't do that was against Jacksonville. Mac Jones was the quarterback. I don't blame them for trying to get some turnovers on Mac Jones and his slow throws. And while the Texans don't get pressure from their pass rush at a high rate, they are top 3 in the league in sack rate and sacks. So this is a little bit of a different setup for Tua than it was for Bo Nix. Remember, when Bo Nix is back, Indianapolis, their pass rush, not as good. But Houston's pass rush can get to the quarterback. And that means Tua's got to keep doing what he's doing, and that's get the ball out of his hand quickly. And zone coverage will facilitate short completions. By the way, facilitate. 10-cent word, am I right? Literally one quarterback all year has completed 35 or more passes against the Texans this season, and it was Cooper Rush in Week 11. That's alarming. But considering the run of quarterbacks the Texans have seen this season, I don't think it's crazy to expect Tagovailoa to be the second one. Additionally, I know the Dolphins are talking about running the football more. They can't do it. Their offensive line isn't very good. Their offense is literally Tua's throwing a second and a half after he gets a snap, or if he doesn't feel like he's getting pressured, 2.5 seconds after he gets the snap. That's it. That's the offense. That's what's going on. And I think asking him to get 25-plus completions, which is what he's been doing every week anyway, really isn't that big of a deal against the Texans defense that should allow it to happen.
Ian Lights Out in the chat described this Tua scenario perfectly with the words, facilitate the matriculation. Couldn't have said it better myself. It's called dink and dunk. That's why Devon Achane gets 7-8 catches a game. And I want to thank Tua, by the way, because I had a 6-legger on the line last week when the Dolphins went into overtime. I know, Proppy, sorry. I had Jonnu Smith over 25 yards as the last leg. He had no catches in regulation. Had 40-some on the drive. That is one of the great hits. When you play those 6-leg, that's what you got to do. You bet a little to win a lot. Come on now. You got to enjoy that.
You do not have to do that. You do not have to bet 6-leg parlays. No.
We're talking about having fun, Uncle Dave.
All right, fine. If you want to do a high-stakes $2.50 parlay bet, that's fine with me.
Go ahead.
No higher than $2.50.
You know what the most fun you can have in a sports book is when you go to the casino window or the cashier with a winning ticket. That is the most fun you can have in a sports book, in my opinion. So remember that.
Don't play parlay. Well, I play parlays, so I shouldn't be one to talk. Nonetheless, you can play all of your parlays and more at BetMGM, and they have a great first touchdown bet promotion that if you're not familiar with, you got to check this out. We've all had our first touchdown bet called back before, and BetMGM is giving you a second chance. With BetMGM's Pro Football Second Chance, place any first touchdown score bet. If your player doesn't score first but scores second, get your entire stake back in cash. No opt-in required. Here's how it works. Place a pregame straight first touchdown score bet in any NFL game. If your player scores the first touchdown of the game, you win your wager as normal. If your player scores the second touchdown of the game, you'll get your stake back in cash. It's that simple. Log into BetMGM for more details. Coming up next, I have a kicker prop that's so good, it's not even available on SportsLine.com after we hear from one of our sponsors.
CBS Sports HQ, giving you college football coverage unlike anyone else.
We're talking Big Ten.
Pre- and post-game coverage.
Are you encouraged with the way that this team responded?
Along with breaking news.
A lot of movement in the rankings this week.
Highlights and expert analysis.
That streak could be in jeopardy here.
Sure. What was your main takeaway from this game? How impressive was his domination?
That really changed the football game.
Let's go ahead and have some more fun.
Another wild ending.
The chaos continues.
Turn to CBS Sports HQ.
All right, listen, Uncle Dave, you coach. Go ahead, Proppy. You get the first word here. Go ahead.
I just wanted to point out, this is the portion where you give out your kicker prop, you see?
Yes, it is. It is. Yes.
Shout out to Kevin McKenzie, who specifically requested a kicker prop from EC. I might have to have a mental health check with him following this program if that's what he's looking for.
So did Jason in the chat, Proppy. He asked for one as well. This one's so good. I can't even find it on Sportsline. I couldn't even put it on there. Uncle Dave made me earlier in the season refuse to play kicker bets that are over minus 150. So I looked at Kaimi Fairbairn and his over 1.5 field goals, which I think he's hit 9 games in a row, is like minus 185. You wouldn't let me play that. Yeah, you would have deleted it off the sheet. You would not have allowed that, correct?
I mean, I really don't want you to do 6-leg parlays either, so I don't know what the hell kind of influence I've got here, but sure.
Well, you gotta throw in this prop in your parlays. Kaimi Fairbairn over 7.5 points at minus 140. So he has multiple field goals in 9 straight games, as I said, and he's over this number in 11, or he's over multiple field goals in 11 of 13 this year. So this prop we're getting at minus 140, where field goals was minus 175. He has 10 or more points in the game in 9 of 13 games this year, and he's over this number in 10 of those. So I want to point 10 of 13. He's over this 7.5 number. Kickers are over this number, by the way, in 6 of their last 8 against Miami. All we need, 2 field goals, 2 extra points. We hit this with 8 total points, right? I mean, it's very simple, and Dave's not allowing me to take a minus 150 or more. This is a prop show exclusive. I'm sorry to the paid subscribers on sportsline.com. The Discord is great. You check that out. Proppy's doing live chats, but you're not going to find my kicker prop on Sportsline this week. Dave, you don't seem to be neither.
I mean, super pick. Yeah, sure, fine. Hey, Alex. Alex. We got to do something about Eric and his kicker prop addiction.
Yeah, I agreed. What are we thinking?
Well, first I'm thinking that we need to hit the casino and hit some slots and have some fun. And then when we're done winning, we're going to call him up and we're just going to be like, hey, dude, listen, the over 1.5 field goal prop thing, when you find it with good odds, that's okay. That's okay. But now you're getting deeper into points, and it's Kaimi Fairbairn. I get it, but it's still minus 140. And we're going to have to sit him down probably at a pizza parlor where I can get some good pizza and have this talk with him. Okay, man?
I think it's going to be an intervention, and I think we need to get his parents involved, and I would also recommend Charles Barkley.
Yeah, good call.
Barkley is the wrong person to get involved. Let me tell you that, Proppy. Let me also say this, Taylor. I'm going to give you one thing about kicker parlays. No less than 5.
Great. That's exactly what I want to hear about.
No less for kicker. Anything else? Mike McClure always says, if it's more than an animal, which is 4 legs, that's a no-go. For kickers, you make it 5. It's a special deal. Okay, just want to point that out. All right, we have some questions.
Are you actually going to make a 5-leg kicker parlay?
Yeah, I have most weeks this year. I hit it once, which is paid for all of them. Yeah.
One is paid for all of them.
Yeah, it pays like
you're like break even on this nonsense adventure.
Yeah, it pays like 16-1. So all you got to do is hit one more, and we're up significantly. Just real simple. Yeah, I got
on
this.
Behalf of
everybody
BetMGM,
out there.
I thank you, sir.
Go to BetMGM. Place your 5-leg kicker parlay. You won't regret it. All right, let's see the. I got a couple questions. I got a couple questions from the chat before we get to the recap screen. All right, I'll start with you, Proppy. TJ Hawkinson. This is from Mike M. He asked about over 40.5 receiving yards. Do you like this one on Monday night against the Bears?
I like it. I lean over on it, but I just don't think TJ Hawkinson is quite there yet. I don't think we're going to see the TJ Hawkinson that we've seen throughout his career, the majority of his career, until really next season. He still doesn't look quite like all the way back to me. So I'd lean over on it, but not something I'm rushing to play.
I mean, he's gone over this in 3 of his last 5 games. In 2 of those 3, it's been 70-plus yards. The thing that I worry about is what's the game script going to be? And is Chicago really the type of defense that's going to limit Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison and force?
And will there be enough passing volume?
There's that too. Are they really going to force Sam Darnold into checking it down to Hawkinson? And there's other tight ends involved in that offense. I would stay away.
We've had a couple on this one, and Halil just chipped in here with Josh Allen's rushing yards, Uncle Dave. So you can find that 35. There's a line out there that's 39.5.
I like it too.
What does this Bills offense devolve into pretty much any time there's a competitive game? It's Josh Allen playing Superman and trying to bring the team back. Last week was almost more of an exception than the rule because he only had 20 rushing yards, but I completely would see Josh Allen having 40 to 100 rushing yards in this game.
I second that, and I will.
He had 82 rushing yards last week. And what the hell was I talking about with 20? He had 82. It's exactly what I was talking about.
I would also add that last week's performance was one of the best performances by a quarterback in a loss that we've seen this season.
Yeah. By the way, J-Rod put in your prop there you gave out for Joel Embiid earlier today, Proppy, the 25-plus points with my kicker prop from Fairbairn. All you got to do is throw in an Australian Open prop, J-Rod, and that's a trio right there for me. That's a 3-legger that you can't miss. All right, Uncle Dave, how about this one for you? I love this one, personally. Aaron Rodgers over 230.5 passing yards against the league's second worst pass defense, Jacksonville.
Yeah, I have had no idea what Jacksonville has tried to accomplish with their secondary all year long. They've insisted on playing man-to-man coverage, and that's an open invitation for Garrett Wilson to have a big game. So definitely start him in fantasy. And I almost feel like at this point, Aaron Rodgers is playing YOLO ball. Like he doesn't even care. And last week he kind of like was playing free, and look what happened. Over 300 yards, nearly won the game. Jacksonville's defense is terrible, and there's question marks with the Jets' run game. Definitely like over 230.5.
All right, let's hit the recap screen and see what else we like this week. We have 12 plays on the board. Proppy is at Anthony Richardson under 190.5 passing yards. Joe Mixon under 81.5 rushing yards. Amon-Ra St. Brown over 67.5 receiving yards for 1.5 units. His top play this weekend, Khalil Shakir over 54.5 receiving yards. Uncle Dave is on Tua Tagovailoa over 24.5 completions. Bo Nix over 21.5 completions. Isaiah Pacheco over 13.5 rushing attempts. And DeAndre Swift on Monday night under 15.5 rushing attempts. I am on Jaden Daniels over 210.5 passing yards. Jalen Warren over 50.5 rushing plus receiving yards. My favorite play of the week is Adam Thielen over 50.5 receiving yards for 1.5 units. And of course, Kaimi Fairbairn over 7.5 points. A SportsLine Prop Show exclusive. Proppy, your favorite play on the board that is not your own is?
DeAndre Swift under 15.5 rushing attempts. That line should be 14.5 at the most. I am going to look to go bet this the moment the stream ends.
Uncle Dave, your favorite play of Proppies on the board?
I was looking at a bunch of Anthony Richardson props myself. The one that stood out to me was completions. It was like 15.5, and that number just seems so low that I didn't have the stones to recommend it. But the next one on my mind was under 190.5 passing yards. It's actually dipped already to 188. And I think I would still take the under on 188. So that's going to be my favorite of Properonis.
Fair enough. Proppy, one more for you. Since this is a player that you love, we just John Jr. just asked about this in the chat. Brian Thomas, over 67.5 receiving yards against the Jets. He is a Proppy favorite. I had to ask you.
We love Brian Thomas. Don't love the quarterback situation. And I still think, the Jets. Yeah. I'd lean over, but don't love it.
The official sound of stay away is
brrr. Exactly.
Guys, what another fun show. Best of luck to both of you in the playoffs of the league that we're all in together. I wish you
Did
both.
we all make the playoffs?
2/3 of us did.
Sore subject. We'll just say that. Hey, I want to thank producer Jake. He is the best in the biz. He makes us look good every week. Want to thank him, as always, for the great job that he does behind the scenes. For Propstarz and Uncle Dave, I am EC. And as I always like to say, let's hit it big.
Hit it big!
Good luck.